We've been in a sermon series looking into the life of Christ, and we've been looking at some of the distinctive characteristics about Jesus, things that really stand out when you look at Him, and how He was distinctive in the things that He did. Today we're going to look at an unorthodox way to treat people, and how He did this. Scriptures show us examples of this, and we're kind of going to go through those. But as you listen today, I want you to maybe do a double take and see if there's people that you hadn't been paying attention to in some way, shape, or form that you might pay attention to in the future. People that you might influence for His sake. Jesus wants us to expand our circle of influence. And you might say, Larry, you know, over the years that you've been here, you've encouraged us to invite friends to Friends Day. I think I've invited everybody that I know. But you know what? God, if you just pay attention here, I think He might open your eyes to some of the unorthodox ways that He treated people and those people. Take a look at this. The first point that I share with you is love those you disagree with. You know, Jesus did this. He loved those that He disagreed with. He did. And He was always pointing out to His followers that they could make a difference in their culture by loving people that maybe didn't agree with them or that saw things a lot different than them. Matthew 5:43 says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Then it says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Now, basically, Jesus is saying, you know, even the righteous people, even those people that are far away from God, they're nice to the people that are nice to them. They love people that love them. That kind of love is basic. It's what, you know, everybody would do. But you're Christ followers. You should be different. Being a Christ follower is anything but being basic. You should be so much more. You're to be distinctive. People should be able to see that you're different. Love even those who disagree with you. Now, we live in a day where there's a lot of people in our world that are going to disagree with you. Our nation is a divided nation. It's politically polarized in a lot of things. But we're encouraged in the church to go out and to love people, to love where you are, wherever you are. And we may think, again, well, Larry, I've tried loving everybody in town. I've invited, again, tons of people to services or that type of thing. But the reality is, sometimes when we think of love those that are around us, we think of those that believe like us. We think God is asking us to love our friends, where we are, love our friends, to love people that are nice to us, or love people. If they love us first, we can love them back. And what I'm saying is, it's my hunch that there's people that oppose you. There's people that maybe you disagree with. And what Jesus is saying is, it's our job to love those even if we disagree with them. Now, another thought that He shares is to love those who are disadvantaged. That's what Jesus did. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus is interacting with people who have struggles that are going on in their life. It could be emotional, it could be physical, whatever the situation, they're disadvantaged in some way, shape, or form. And He didn't do this to enhance His position in society, make people think well of Him. In fact, some people, they ridiculed Him for doing it. But Jesus genuinely cared about people. He loved people. Envision with me the lineup of Jesus coming into a town where He's with His disciples, and they're kind of a ragtag team, if you want to call them that. There, some would look at them and say they're not that educated. They're just a bunch of fishermen. Or there was the tax collector, or the Simon the Zealot, who was kind of a rebel of his day. And they would go in with this ragtag team, and then another whole ragtag team would start pursuing them. people who were struggling physically, people who were struggling mentally or emotionally in some way. Do you remember a time whenever you went to the doctor, maybe it was a flu season or something like that, and the whole place was full, and everybody is in there is coughing, and they're sick, and you're thinking, I don't want to be close to these people. They're all sick, and you're sick too. And they're well, this is what Jesus' life was like every day. That's the ones that he was around. That's the people that he was around was a bunch of kind of sick people, because he was around people like me and like you. The overlooked, the ostracized, the disadvantaged. Jesus cared about all of them. I know that some of you have heard of Tim Tebow, and I don't know how much you know about Tim Tebow. He has a foundation where he raises tons of money, millions of dollars actually. One of the ministries of his Tebow Foundation is something called A Night to Shine. And this is a place, when I say this is, they do it on Valentine's Day. It was the 4th time that they'd done it this year. But 375 churches in 11 countries, 28 different denominations, over 60,000 special needs kids and adults are honored at this one event that he does, that's done throughout the world. In God's kingdom, everybody has value. It was when he was in the Philippines, and I don't know how much you know about him. His parents were missionaries in the Philippines. He was exposed to a little boy that had special needs that wouldn't let go of him. He just, he grabbed a hold of Tebow and he wouldn't let him go. And he could never forget about that. It was always in his mind. And so as he has gained influence, this guy has done incredible things. In God's economy, the physically or emotionally challenged are loved by God just as much as those who are not physically or emotionally challenged. In Luke chapter 14, verse 12 says, Then Jesus said to his host, When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends and your brothers or your sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. The gates of heaven are handicap accessible, but the second you pass through those gates, you'll see that things change instantly, and you'll have a glorious body, and you will be changed. I will be changed. There will be no infirmities, no sickness, no disease, no paralysis. One of the fortunate things of my life when I was in high school was that I was good friends with a young man at church named Doug Robertson who had some special needs. And I remember in our church, also being the church that I served for a long time, 22 years, I remember there was a guy in our church that he started something and it went on, and he invited everybody at Thanksgiving. He called it Orphan Thanksgiving. And he invited people, and those that were military maybe didn't have anywhere to go, but he invited people, and he looked for people just to come to the church and share on Thanksgiving. Many times Kathy and I would go, but not always, but we'd go with family too. But, maybe this is a new area of evangelism. Do you love people with disabilities where you are? Do you love the disadvantaged? They are folks that really need attention and need care and need love. Mark Twain said, "Kindness is the language the deaf can hear and the blind can read." Kindness is the language that the deaf can hear and the blind can read. Jesus was no respecter of persons. He loved equally. He loved everyone. He served everyone equally. He loved those who were different than us. One group you certainly know that he loved was the sick. Back in Jesus' day, there was a disease that was called leprosy. It's still, it's still around today, but not anything like it was back then. And it would have been like the same type of stigma that AIDS and HIV had in the 80s. And if you got even, a spot of leprosy on your body, it would be no time until your whole body would be covered with it. And it was an infectious, contagious skin disease. And you would have to leave your family, and you would have to move where there were others that had the same like disease into, I guess, what we could call a leper colony. And all the people that were there were sick. And if they ever went somewhere besides this one little area, they had to yell words, "Unclean, unclean." And if you were a mom or if you were someone, you would grab your little ones and get them close to you and scurry away because you didn't want to be infected by this leprosy. When it came to self-worth, these people had to be in the negative numbers, if you understand what I'm saying. Mark 1, verse 40, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, talking to Jesus, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus, it says, was indignant. He was really upset that this fella would think that he wouldn't. He reached out his hand and he touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Now, I don't know if you notice this. I want you to notice something. Jesus doesn't run. Like most people, "Unclean, unclean." They take off running. Jesus doesn't run. He stays right there. And I would encourage you to notice something else. Jesus touches him. It says he reached out his hand and he touched the man. Before he ever healed him, Jesus touched the man. He was always willing to go the extra mile. And he touches him and then he heals him. Jesus was shocked that the man would have to ask if he would heal him or if he would, be close to him to touch him. Maybe you need someone, or maybe you know someone that needs a touch. Maybe it's just a pat on the back. Maybe it's a high five or a fist bump. Maybe it's just an arm around the shoulder. Maybe it's a spouse who holds your hand even in spite of your disagreements. And a touch will make such a difference. Maybe it'll rekindle things in a relationship. Well, besides the sick, there was also the rich. Jesus reached out to those that were wealthy, to those who were rich. Even though Jesus was poor, it says the Son of Man did not have a place to lay his head. He interacted and he became friends with some very wealthy people. Last week I told you about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and Mary poured on Jesus something that was worth $50,000. Where would she get a bottle of perfume worth that amount of money? Have you ever been in one of those settings where you realize that you're out of your league and you're way over your head with some people? Remember, Kathy was in her late 20s. Executive vice president at the company where she worked, invited us to go eat for the evening. We went to a place that was there in the very old section of Shreveport that I knew where it was, but I didn't know anything about this house. It was a private supper club that, you had to pay so many thousands of dollars just to be a member of the club. And then when you brought your friends in, you had to pay like $100 or something a head for all those that were eating there. And when we arrived and I looked at my car and I looked at all the cars that were around, I realized that I was in kind of a little bit different company than I was used to being in. We had a 6-7 course meal. In between each meal, we got this little thing of sorbet. I'd never had any. It's kind of like ice cream to me. And I was cleaning my palate in between the meals. In between the courses. And they're kind of like meals, too. They were. But I was reading a story about a preacher who was invited to speak in front of a business group. He was put up in this really super posh hotel. He wrote, "I'd never seen anything like it. I walked in the room. It was kind of like a hotel where you'd be stockpiling the shampoos and all the things that were there. Grab that soap, baby." And he said they had a sewing kit there in the bathroom that was a thing that you could take. And he said, "I don't sew. I don't know anything about sewing." But I was like, hey, we're getting that sewing kit. That's cool. He said they had robes, his and her white robes for me and my wife, and they had slippers there by the side of our bed. And he said they were brand new slippers every night. So you got to change slippers every night. He said, I didn't want to be wasteful with what they were providing. He said, I didn't even wear slippers at home or anything, but here I was wearing slippers. Said I walked in the bathroom and it was like, huge. I couldn't believe it. He said there was a separate place, kind of a private room for you to go to the bathroom. And he said I walked in there and there was a telephone on the wall. And he said, I did what every guy would do. He said, I had the door closed. I picked up the phone and I called my wife. She was outside and her cell phone rang, and she probably looked at it and said, I don't know who this is. He said she was reluctant, but she finally answered the phone. And he said, hey, babe. She said, what are you doing? I thought you were in the bathroom. He said, oh, I'm just sitting in here thinking of you. I don't know. But if you ever, maybe you've not ever been around. Maybe someday you'll get to be around the lifestyle of the rich and famous type people. But Jesus was a friend to the sick. Jesus was a friend to the people that were rich. Lazarus, we talked about him. Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus. There was Matthew, the tax collector. You remember Matthew was one of the disciples, but there was also Zacchaeus. Anyway, there was the tax collector above all the tax collectors. And I'm just saying, Jesus, he loved all people, whoever they were. Do you ever look at maybe those that are wealthier and you think, oh, they'd never come to church with me if I ask them? Well, let me tell you something. Every single one of them have a hole in their heart just like you do that only Jesus can fill. That is the truth. That is the absolute truth. Well, Jesus loved the sick. Jesus loved the rich. Jesus loved the poor. He talked about a great deal about the poor. There's an example of Jesus noticing the poor. It's kind of a cool moment. And they're outside the temple treasury and people are coming in. It's in Luke 21 verse 1 says, as Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. She had given everything. Now, Jesus noticed what nobody else noticed. It wasn't that the gifts of the wealthy weren't valuable. They were. But Jesus noticed the gift of this poor woman because it was also very, very valuable what she'd given everything. Jesus knew how much her gift represented, and it was all that she had. Jesus' ministry is clear. Whether you're rich or whether you're poor, the kingdom of God is for you. There's no room for us to discriminate against those that are different than we are for any reason. Jesus didn't. Jesus saw both extremes, but he loved both equally. Now our tendency is to take shots at the opposite extreme. We take shots at those that have a lot more than us, or we take shots at those that have a lot less than we do, and we say, well, they just need to get to work. If they had work, if they had a good work ethic, maybe this would be different. It depends a lot, though, and this, on the family that God has allowed us to be put in. I want to tell you more as I studied more about Tim Tebow and his foundation. I was introduced to him at the North American Christian Convention a couple of years ago when I went to California. Kathy and I went to Los Angeles. And the fellow who was the president of the North American Christian Convention that year is a fellow by the name of Dave Stone. And Dave tells stories about how the church that he works with in Louisville was able to help Tim develop this Night to Shine, where they have kind of like a prom for those special needs. Over 60,000 special needs people were involved in that last year. He has things like a place called Timmy's Playroom, where in children's hospitals around the United States, not in all of them, but in a number of them, there are special playrooms for kids that are in these hospitals. I was intrigued to find out that the First Shriners Hospital was built in Shreveport, and there in that hospital in Shreveport, there's a Timmy's room in the hospital there. Oh, I told you that his parents were missionaries in the Philippines, and there's the Tebow Cure Hospital, where in the Philippines, where Tim was born, and it's where parents can bring those children. That little boy that was deformed, that wouldn't let go of him, just always left an impression on his mind. He helps with orphan care in several locations around the world. He also, part of his foundation, helps raise funds to cover the cost of adoptions for those that are willing to adopt special needs kids. And he helps cover that cost. Dave Stone wrote about how he was asked to speak at one of these events where the folks raised money for the Tebow Foundation. He said, I was in a place where I could not believe the people I was around. He said, everywhere I looked, there was some star. He said this auction that was about to take place that I had been invited to come and observe, he said every dollar was going toward the Tim Tebow Foundation. He said they had a girl come up. She was the winner of a super chef competition on TV. She'll come to your house and she'll cook a meal for you. Who'll start the bidding? It was a guy named Scott Van Pelt. I don't know if you know him from ESPN. He was doing the auctioning that day. He said, well, I thought it might go for $1,000. He said it was $50,000 that was paid for her to come and cook a meal at somebody's house. He said, my nose was itching, but I was not going to scratch it because I did not want anybody to think I was bidding on anything. He said there was a lady, he said if I said her name, you'd know her. She sings in a group, but she's a Christian lady, and she had offered to come and do a concert at someone's home. He said, so for $140,000. And he said, my mind was thinking, where in the heck do these people get this kind of money? And he said, but I was asking the wrong question. That wasn't the question that I should have been asking. I should have been saying, how can these people give up what they could have had for themselves to give to others, to give to kids, to give to Christian ministry? He said, it's just an unbelievable thing as they raised millions of dollars that night, and he watched it happen. You know what the old devil wants? The old devil wants everybody in church to fight. If we can all start fighting, he'd like that a whole lot better. The wealthy ought to mock the less fortunate. The less fortunate ought to fight with the wealthy. Whatever the poor, they should take shots at the rich. But Jesus wants everyone to get along. Those that have special needs, those that are blessed, maybe that's not what's in their life. Jesus wants everyone in his church to work together because he needs us all. He needs us all. Whether it's the rich or the sick or the poor, or this last group I want to tell you about is the desperate. Can you get out of your comfort zone and love and reach out to those that are desperate? They've hit rock bottom. They are at the very lowest that will ever happen in life. There's nowhere else they can look but up to God. Oh Lord, I give, I surrender, I promise to stop running from you. But there's always a risk when you're helping the desperate. Mark 5, Jesus does this. It says in verse 1, then they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came up from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. They'd wrapped this dude with a chain, and he broke out of it. Well, Jesus tells his disciples he wants to go to the other side of the lake. And the disciples are like, why do you want to go over there? There's nothing over there. It's kind of a desolate place. There's just cliffs and rocks and mountains. There was a reason that there weren't any people that lived over there. It was because of this crazy nut that was over in this area. He was demon-possessed. He lived in the caves. How do you know that? You say, well, everybody knew it. Everybody knew this area where Jesus had decided to go. They had tried to bind him, and he was too strong. They chained him, and he broke through the chains. He would cut himself with rocks all day long. He screamed at the top of his lungs. He ran around naked without, any clothes on. Jesus gets out of the boat, and here comes a wild man out of the caves running to Jesus. Verse 9, Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." He's talking about all the demons in him. And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on a nearby hillside, and the demons begged Jesus, "Send us into the pigs. Allow us to go into them." And he gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. But the next paragraph tells us that Jesus and his disciples sat down with this man in his right mind, clothed, and they had a conversation. How'd that happen? Well, a lot of things can happen when somebody comes in touch with Jesus, makes contact with Jesus. He can change a lot of things. Jesus didn't run when he came. I would have run. If I saw a crazy, nut, demon-possessed guy running at me, I'd take off the other way, but not Jesus. One preacher preached a sermon on this section of Scripture, called it "The Nude Dude in a Rude Mood." And that's kind of who he was, a nude dude in a rude mood. Verse 18, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you." Verse 20 goes on and it says, "So the man went away and he began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed." I want to share with you a little bit more about this man. Jesus could have said, "Hey, cool, he'd be good for the Jesus Revival show that's going around. He could tell everybody everything. Maybe he could take advantage of the guy a little." But Jesus wouldn't do that. He said, to go tell everybody, and he began to tell everybody in the Decapolis. This area was kind of an opening to, Decapolis means 10 cities, to 10 cities that were in this area. And Jesus told him to go tell people. Well, now, you probably know the story. Jesus fed the 5,000, okay, but there's also where he fed the 4,000, and it's when he came back to this exact area. And this guy had told so many people about himself and what Jesus had done for him, and they knew what he had been. And they said, well, if he could do something for that guy, maybe he can do something for me. And 4,000 of them were evidently there or more that day. Now, that happened 6 to 9 months later. But even a more interesting piece of the story is when they started to really go after the Christians. And I'm saying, like Paul was chasing people from town to town. This was an area in the Decapolis over across the Sea of Galilee. They just decided they didn't want to go over there. They'd heard of the crazed man, and they just decided maybe all the people over there. So for the first 300 years of the church, when a lot of people were being persecuted, this church was thriving and growing. And I don't know if that would have had something to do with it either. Why Jesus just leave him there to tell everybody about him? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder why he's left me here to tell people about Jesus. Who can you reach out to for the Lord? Jesus had conversations with an ambitious lawyer, an adulterous woman, a doubting disciple. Jesus had conversations with a money-hungry tax collector, a wealthy ruler, a poor single mom. Jesus had conversations with a criminal on the cross, an unclean woman in a crowd, a paralyzed man. Jesus had conversations with a foreign woman walking to get water. You want to be great? Love people the way Jesus loved people. Love the disadvantaged. Love people who are different from you. Love people that disagree with you. Let's show the world that we love them. They'll know you're Christians by your love. This is how people will know. Faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Do you love people the way Jesus loved people? Would y'all stand with me?